With Intel joining Nvidia and AMD in the GPU market, you would expect to see more competition for a spot in your computer. However, somehow, there's less competition. Your hard-earned dollars don't get as far as they used to. How did this happen, and what's the future of consumer GPUs? Well, that's what we're going to be exploring. Welcome to the GPU Stratification of 2025. What do I mean by GPU stratification? Well, if you're unfamiliar with that term, stratification essentially means layering. Do you remember those density tubes in school? The ones where if you shake them, the different materials mix up but then separate back out into different layers? That's kind of what I mean. Each layer is clearly different from one another. It's not gradual. Well, that's a cool effect to see in elementary school. Stratification is not what you want to see in the GPU market, or in any product category for that matter. Each of the three GPU manufacturers, NVIDIA, AMD, and Intel, are only competing in one segment of the GPU market. And when I say one segment, I mean one price segment. I estimated the prices of the current GPU offerings from each of the three companies, and this is the graph I got representing that data. And while my data is far from perfect, dang scalpers, I just want to see the general trend. What I hope you'll immediately notice is how separate each company is. From $100 to about $270, Intel is the only game in town. AMD and NVIDIA don't really make $200 GPUs. Then from $270 to $430, AMD rules. Finally, from $700 all the way up to $2,000, NVIDIA is king. For the majority of price brackets, your decision has already been made for you, at least if you want to buy a new GPU. The used market is obviously different. You can buy a GPU from any manufacturer at any price level. It's like if you took that density tube from earlier and mixed it up into one big dirt cloud, which, if you're a consumer, is exactly what you want. You don't want to be limited to one company or one product. You want options. This forces companies to compete and ultimately produce better products for you. Because NVIDIA, AMD, and Intel are not competing as much because they occupy different niches, you will likely get a worse product in the current landscape. So what got us into this situation where there's so little competition? Well, let us cast our thoughts back to the good old year of 2020. Memorable for the unprecedented, worldwide, devastating crypto craze. All of a sudden, the GPU in your computer was useful for more than just gaming. You could now make money. Or well, I guess, money. This caused a little bit of a GPU shortage. I actually got my first PC during this time, and believe me when I say GPUs were as good as gold. To NVIDIA, and even AMD for that matter, there was no point in releasing budget GPUs because they'd sell out anyway. Why not raise the price? And that's exactly what they did. NVIDIA and AMD both are now more expensive. Fast forward to 2022, when this thing called AI starts coming around, this is pushed further. GPUs are now worth even more because they can be sold at a higher price to companies like OpenAI and Google that buy them in bulk for AI training. This is a little bit of a simplification, but regardless, GPUs for gamers is not as profitable for these companies as other avenues are. AMD does manage to keep its prices lower, partly through their chiplet technology and partly out of the goodness in their heart, I guess. We now have AMD in the mid-range and NVIDIA toward the high end. And then here comes Intel in 2022, entering the GPU market, ready to upset the incumbents, and not yet. They attack the low end with some buggy and quirky GPUs, to say it nicely. It does make sense that Intel targeted the budget in with their first release because they're simply new to this. Are you going to try to shoot for the moon on your first attempt? No. Intel needs time to develop their technology, which, with the recent Battlemage release, seems to show improvement. But I'll talk about that later. Anyway, this is how we ended up with the graph I showed at the start. Intel minding their own business at the bottom, AMD in the middle, and NVIDIA at the high end with a little bit of kerfuffle in the mid to high price range. Now in 2025, some of the next generation GPUs have been released, and this is what the market looks like. So what should you do as a GPU hungry consumer, and what do I think will happen in the long term? Well, we'll start with the first question. If you're a budget gamer like yours truly, I would seriously consider the Intel Battlemage lineup, namely the B570 and B580. However, I'm not a reviewer. There's plenty of other videos that'll give you a better idea of the performance of these GPUs. But what I can say is that from an economic and competition perspective, Intel is absolutely the best option. Here's why. NVIDIA and AMD are not fiercely competing in the consumer space, partly because of aforementioned stratification, and partly because there's way more money in other applications like AI. There's no reason for them to be competitive in consumer GPUs. I mean, take a look at their stock prices. What are angry gamers going to do? Intel is different though. A, look at their stock price. But B, they don't have a good foothold in graphics processing units, period, consumer or commercial, so they're struggling. They are fighting tooth and nail to gain market share. Even though they don't have competition at the budget price point per se, they're acting like they do because they desperately want to catch up to NVIDIA and AMD. There's no way they're making any real money at the current price of their GPUs, but that's great for you. Better and cheaper GPUs. The problem is, if you're not a budget gamer, you want a mid-tier or high-end GPU, You're stuck between two companies that barely care anymore. That sucks. Here's the good news. I think we will see some change, which leads me into answering the second question. What happens in the future? Based on Intel's actions, I think they will make higher performing GPUs and thus break the current GPU stratification. We've already seen a decent generational uplift from Intel's first generation Alchemist to their second generation Battlemage of about 20 or so percent, and that's while keeping the price the same. If they slap some more XC cores or whatever they call them on one of those bad boys, they will likely create a competitor for the $350 to $400 to $450 price range. By the third or fourth generation of Intel GPUs, encroaching upon AMD's hold of the mid-tier looks like a serious possibility. Who knows? Maybe they'll even start to get to the enthusiast level. It's impossible to say exactly, but there's no doubt that Intel will increase their product selection as they vie for more market control. As for Nvidia and AMD, I'm not quite as optimistic. I don't see much reasons for them to change other than the threat of Intel. If Intel really gets down to business, then yes, maybe the other two decide to get their act together, but that could be a little while. So for now, while the GPU stratification of 2025 exists, I'm a fanboy of Intel Arc GPUs. Unless you could hook me up, Nvidia.